Hello. Hi. Midweek ministry for the North Shore Unitarian Church. I'm Reverend Ron Ferris, and this is your opportunity, I hope, to stay grounded and connected in this time of quarantine and pandemic. I recognize that we have made a mistake. I've made a mistake, and that is that I have failed to promote this moment as I should have. So in the future, we will be promoting it a little bit more vigorously to see if it is in fact sticky and worth doing. In the meantime, I should, programming note, we are going to be discontinuing the midweek ministry throughout the summer, with the last of it occurring this month. Certainly the last week of June will be the last. We might end it beforehand. I'm not sure yet. So as you enter, I would love it if you would say hello, and maybe we could get a chat going, because I do have some questions for you today. So this weekend, we're going to be talking about in the service proper on Sunday. We're going to be talking about, is that you, Cynthia? Or it's posting as North Shore Unitarians Canada. That's a awfully large group. But anyway, we're going to be talking about how we find joy, the necessity of joy in times of trouble, the necessity of fun, of humor, of laughter, and where to find that in these times of great struggle and challenge, uprising, deep soul searching, personally and nationally. And internationally, and of course, a pandemic, and not to mention all the fallout from the pandemic, from economic, truly economic fears, well-founded economic fears. People are wondering what is going to happen to them and their family, based on the amount of work that they're able to do. And we see that a second wave is starting to emerge in the US, and hopefully in Canada, we are doing better, and hopefully that remains the case. But certainly a destabilized and economically challenged United States is going to have implications for our own economic well-being up here in Canada, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a hard moment in history. And so how do we find joy? That's what we'll be talking about this weekend. A New Yorker cartoon. Actually, Cynthia, if you want to, you could, or well, I don't know what the copyright situation on that, but it might be fun to throw up a couple of New Yorker cartoons, some places in the service. That could be fun, but again, only if legal. Today, though, I want to talk about not joy so much. Joy is a coping mechanism. Also, it's a thing in and of itself, but I want to talk about coping mechanisms, particularly meditation. I mean, that's one of my coping mechanisms. It has been something that I'd say I'm a dabbler. I'm committed to it, but not robustly. So what I would say is most weekdays, I wake up earlier than anybody else in my family, praise be, and it's a quiet moment, and I fix myself a cup of coffee, have a couple of sips, and that's all for a little bit. I just sip on my coffee for a little bit and let my mind go where it will, let my body sort of adjust to being awake. And then sometimes I might read a page or two of whatever book I'm working on, right now. That's Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram, a fantastic book. And then when I feel like my mind, hi Cindy, is chocolate is Cindy's coping mechanism. Okay, we should probably talk, right? It's good up to a point. Actually, it's one of my coping mechanisms too. But I would like to steer the conversation in a little more healthful place, at least for me, because I cope with chocolate really well, particularly if it's combined with some form of ice cream or baked good also. So I just want to go over my routine for you and then wonder if you have a meditation routine, and invite you to share that at some point with me, or to start the conversation in the congregation. So as I said, I read, and then when I feel like my mind is awake, but also not overly stimulated. For instance, I will not look at Facebook. I will not look at my email. I don't do anything else before. All I do is have a cup of coffee and sit and look out the window, and then perhaps read a little bit of a book that does have some intellectual stimulation, spiritual stimulation, but isn't newsy at all, doesn't have any urgency to it. And so then I'm able to make my way down to my meditation pad pillow. It has a name, which I forgot, but it's one of these pillows. It's like this big, and I sit on it. And the first thing I do is I take some sovereignty over my breathing. So I breathe in slowly to the count of 4 up to 6, perhaps. So and then exhale the same count. And I repeat that for as long as it feels good to do so. The idea, I think, is to it's a double move in a way, because you're bringing intention to an automatic process, but there's a limit to the intention that you could bring to that automatic process. And so you're reminding yourself of both of those things, and sitting, or I should say breathing with intention. So it's bringing intentionality to the very, kind of core. And plus it's just soothing. It not that I'm particularly hyper at 6:30 in the morning, but it settles one. And so I do that for a bit. And then I move into listening, which I've done with the congregation, where I listen to a faraway sound, a medium distance sound, and a nearby sound. It just so happens that in my neighborhood, there's construction all over the place. That often drowns out all sounds, but sometimes I could hear the coal plant, I could hear the construction, I could hear a bird, and I could hear my breathing. And I focus on each one of those in turn, and then I focus on all of them together. And that does a few things also. That situates me in space. One of the things actually that I just learned yesterday is that by practicing with your senses, you can, so for instance, musicians have the ability to hear more sounds than non-musicians, generally speaking. And it's not because they were necessarily born with a hearing superpower. It's because the neural networks, the gating networks in their brain, they can control and open a little bit wider and let more information in, so they hear more particular sounds. So in a way, by training, and this is speculation on my part right now, but by focusing on each sound and really trying to hone in on them, I'd like to think that I'm practicing, or at least taking baby steps in practicing controlling the information gating that I do. So it locates me. It helps me take some control over the amount of information that I'm receiving. And it also, and possibly most importantly, is a practice for not holding on to input. When you hear, what I try to do is not judge or react to emotionally the noises that I'm hearing. Sometimes they can be quite jarring. I mean, a bird will elicit from me something pleasant, and a jackhammer, not so much, right? But what I try to do is use that moment as practice for not making judgments on the input the information, the data, the perceptions that I'm having, and not holding on to them and also if I do have a emotional reaction to it, to let that go as quickly as the sound goes. So it is an exercise of letting go, of not holding on to things, of not being reactive, right? So then I take that mindset and practice of not letting go, or of letting go and not holding on. I take that into the next phase. So my meditation is not just sitting down. I'm not good at that. So I break it into different activities to keep myself engaged. So the first activity is controlling the breath with an equal count in and an equal count out. The second step is listening to the three positions relative to me. And the third step is taking that sense of non-reactivity and non-attachment into a more traditional sort of Vipassana mindfulness practice, where I used to call it catching thoughts, but now I just call it watching thoughts. And so I'll just try to notice the thoughts. I won't try to stop them necessarily, but just notice the thoughts that come into my brain. And again, what I am trying to do is to not attach to them emotionally. So that's pretty difficult because emotions are so subtle. So they can be, right? They're so subtle. It's like a fuse, and you don't realize the fuse has been lit until you are in the midst of an explosion of anything. It could be, that could be anger or irritation, jealousy, happiness, whatever it is, right? But it is, the idea is to stay connected, but not beholden to those emotions. And that's practice for life, right? So we practice very intentionally on the mat, or on the cushion, I forgot what it's called, for application throughout the day. So that's what I forgot. I lost count. Maybe the third or fourth thing that I do is I sit more or less as a Zen or Vipassana and watch my thoughts. And it really helps me to label them as they come. And usually my labels are pretty general, and they are fantasy, scheduling, or memory. And in a way, all of it's fantasy anyway, right? You're projecting a schedule into the future, you're remembering something in the past, and a memory is effectively a fantasy. But it does help for me to divide those things out. Also keeps it interesting. So I sit and label my thoughts. And it just so happens that as I label them, they tend to disappear. And there are moments when it feels like no thoughts are coming. And that's actually kind of a pleasant feeling. Sometimes I intentionally stay with a thought. On the rare occasion, I'll intentionally stay with a thought and treat it as though the muse or spirit is working through my neurons and telling me something. And the interesting thing about this, at least for me, the interesting thing about this part is a lot of my, I notice I have an internal voice, and I never noticed that before this year. But I think it's always been there. And the internal voice is when I'm sitting in this way and reflecting mindfully on my mind and what it's doing, there's the voice of a teacher. And it's probably because I'm a minister, but like I'll think, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then this voice clicks in, and it's doing what I'm doing now. It starts to talk to some imagined fantastical group of people. And you are all fantastical people. Well, you're fantastic people anyway. But there's this like, sage voice that clicks in my head and starts talking to me and an imagined group of people. And that's strikes me as strange. And so now I'm catching myself doing that. I'm like, oh, so it begins to be a little bit of a hall of mirrors. Excuse me. So after all of that, I typically do some Wim Hof breathing. There might be other terms for it. I learned it from Wim Hof. And by learned, that might be even too strong of a word. Effectively, it's hyperventilating. And but I was actually doing this quite on accident. Naturally, I've always been a swimmer. And at the end of all of my workouts, I would hyperventilate, because you could hold your breath for longer after hyperventilating, and then swim underwater for the length of the pool, or sometimes 2 lengths of the pool. So I'd sit on the edge of the pool and start breathing deeply, taking deep breaths, and then increasing the rapidity of them. So until I felt ready, and then a couple of big breaths, and then off I would go. Well, the Wim Hof method is to actually exhale that last breath all the way, and then to sit in that. And it does some pretty interesting things physiologically. I think it releases like oxytocin and produces DMT in your body. So it feels really good. It feels a little trippy, and it's soothing, and you let it all your air out for as long as you can. And after a while, it does begin to feel uncomfortable. Sometimes I feel like I could feel the blood in my arms, particularly, if that makes any sense. And my diaphragm starts to shake. And then you inhale, and you hold that for 15 seconds. Now, the exhale can last for me anywhere from like a minute and a half to a minute 45 seconds. And then you do that again. And then if you want to, you can do it a third time. I have noticed that every time I do it, I can hold my breath out for longer, and the sensation is more. There's more of a sensation. So that is a very pleasant, though it's also hard work, believe it or not, to breathe that hard. Feels like hard work. Oftentimes I'm feeling pretty lazy at that moment. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. And then I do it, and it feels fabulous. And then I pray. And usually I pray much like I do in the congregation, by holding my hands out as though I'm reaching out to the world. And I will often pray to Creator, or sometimes I'll say, I don't know what to call you. But then I'll introduce myself, make sure that the collective that's listening, or that I'm addressing, the interconnected web of existence, knows who's talking in that moment. And I start with thanks, and then ask for whatever help I might need, or just confess to things that I'm thinking about, or things that trouble me. And that does feel connective. That feels like being in dialogue with something beyond my cushion. So that feels pretty good. And at the end of that, I close, as I do these days in church, by just saying thank you 3 times. And that's that. And so that's my morning meditation routine. And I can tell the days that I miss, that I don't do it. It doesn't mean that the days that I do it are always perfect days, or that I'm always a perfect person on those days, but I'm probably better than I would have been if I hadn't done it. And my reactivity is decreased when I do it, and probably my capacity for wisdom is increased when I do it, because wisdom develops in the spaces. When you're being reactive, there's simply not much time for wisdom. So that's what I do. That's one of my coping mechanisms to get through life, period, to get through the day, period, and certainly to connect and ground myself in this time of great challenge. So I encourage you to enhance your chocolate coping with some meditative or prayer reflective life. You could even reflect on how good the chocolate is. I suppose that would work. At any rate, can't get with the praying routine, but you should know that I do not eat chocolate while I meditate. My first reaction is to say that's probably a good idea, but then you've heard of course, the eating mindfully. So, give it a shot. Let me know. And I bet, Cindy, that there has been a piece of chocolate that you have eaten and said, "Oh my God. Oh, thank you." So maybe you do pray. I don't know. But whatever it is that you do, I hope that you all do something. I would encourage you to find some reflective, contemplative practice that slows down your reactivity and allows room for the wisdom to generate, whatever that may be, chocolate or cartoons or gritty British dramas. As John Lennon and Elton John once said, "Whatever gets you through the night, it's all right." Even if it's chocolate, I suppose. All right. We'll see you on Sunday. Have a good day, everybody. Blessings on you.